Hey Gretch, it is Wednesday and we are going to start our third interactive read aloud. So remember, when we meet, we're going to be writing about something that you found interesting, or you can choose to write about the question at the end, or just choose a word from the glossary and we can kind of create a message about it. So today we're going to be learning about living in space. What do living things need to survive? Humans are living things that need water, food, air, and shelter. For humans to explore outer space, engineers must find ways to meet these needs. Spacecraft, like the International Space Station, provide a shelter for astronauts with everything they need to survive. On Earth, plants produce oxygen, an important part of the air people breathe. With no plants in space, engineers had a challenge to solve. How would they provide oxygen for astronauts? Their solution was to bring tanks of oxygen from Earth. The next challenge is temperature. In the sunlight, the temperature in space is boiling hot. In the shade, it's freezing cold. To solve this problem, spacecraft are designed with systems to cool and warm the air so that astronauts are sheltered from the outside temperatures. Another challenge engineers face is how to send astronauts into outer space with enough food and water for long visits. Fresh food goes rotten quickly, so it wouldn't last very long. To solve this problem, engineers invented a way to dehydrate the food, removing all the water from it. Dehydration stops food from going rotten. When astronauts are ready to eat, they add water to the food and heat it up. Astronauts also need water to drink and to prepare their food. Water is very heavy, and there's not enough room to carry much of it on a spacecraft. Engineers created a water recycling machine that cleans used water so it can be used again. On Earth, there is gravity, a force that keeps us on the ground instead of floating away into the sky. In space, there is microgravity. Micro means very small. So in microgravity, there's only a tiny amount of gravity. Everything floats. Microgravity creates many challenges for engineers. Floating in microgravity can be fun if you want to do flips in the air, but it can be challenging when you have to stay right side up and in one place to do your job. If you were an engineer, what could you design that would help astronauts stay in one place so they can work or eat? Spacecraft are designed with bars and straps that astronauts can use to hold themselves in place. Instead of standing on the floor, they slip their feet under a strap to keep themselves upright. Engineers create ways for astronauts to sleep without floating and bumping into things. Astronauts have sleeping bags that they attach to the wall of the spacecraft. Anything that's not tucked in to the sleeping bag, like this astronaut's arms, will float. He looks kind of silly there. In microgravity environments, drinking liquids like water can be difficult. If you try to pour a cup of water in space, it just floats in the air. It doesn't stay in the cup. Aerospace engineers designed pouches to hold water for drinking. When astronauts want to drink, they get a pouch and drink it through a straw. Look at, they're showing you right here is a water droplet just floating. does look kind of cool. Sometimes astronauts need to go outside so they can repair the spacecraft or perform a science experiment. When they leave the spacecraft, it's called a spacewalk. Not to go backwards, but this reminds me of like the water in Moana, where they kind of like plop it on her head sometimes. Aerospace engineers design spacesuits with everything an astronaut might need for many hours on a spacewalk. Spacesuits cover astronauts' whole bodies and make sure they stay the right temperature. They also have air tanks with oxygen for astronauts to breathe. It's important that astronauts stay safe when they're out in space. They don't want to float away. Spacesuits have a tether, a strap attaching the spacesuit to the aircraft. They do not want to float away. That would be terrible. Astronauts on spacewalks need to communicate with astronauts inside the spacecraft. Their suits have cameras, speakers, and microphones to let them do this. An astronaut might communicate about the next step to make in a repair or when they should go back inside the spacecraft. Astronauts aboard the spacecraft also communicate with people back on Earth. They communicate with mission control and their families using email, phone, and video chat. So here's the question that you can also choose to answer. Pretend you're an astronaut in space calling home to tell your family about your first day on the International Space Station. What is your life like in space? Or you can choose from the glossary. Here's spacesuit, shelter, air tank. They're pointing to the tether, drink, food, microgravity, sleeping, or International Space Station. Okay, so when we meet, we are going to be writing something you found interesting or something from the glossary, or you can choose this question. Okay, I will see you back in a little bit.